If I sign, I'm safe. If I don't, I'm free.
They say grief changes you, but I didn't know it could make you feel like a stranger in your own life. When my husband Daniel died, I thought I'd be left with a hole in my heart, not a puzzle in my hands. He was my partner for 10 years. We built everything together. Our home, our businesses, our plans for a family we never quite had. I thought I knew every corner of him. I was wrong. At the reading of the will, I expected the usual: the house, the accounts, maybe some letters or keepsakes. Instead, the lawyer's voice caught on a line that made the whole room fall silent. $10 million, on the condition that she never remarries. I laughed at first, thought it was some archaic joke or a mistake in the wording, but it was real, signed, dated. And then I found out he'd updated it just 3 months before his death. Why? Why would the man who swore to love me until death put a price tag on my future? Was it jealousy? Paranoia? Or did he know something I didn't? I was about to walk away from the money, until I discovered that the condition wasn't about me finding someone else. It was about keeping me from finding the truth. And I wasn't about to let him control me from the grave. The rain started before the service and didn't stop. It was the kind of heavy, steady downpour that soaked you through no matter how many umbrellas you had. People say rain at a funeral is symbolic cleansing, renewing. I thought it felt more like punishment. Daniel had been gone for exactly 7 days. 7 days since the heart attack in the middle of a Tuesday morning meeting. No goodbye, no warning, just gone. The church smelled faintly of lilies and damp wool. I sat in the front row, surrounded by family who spoke in hushed tones, their eyes darting to me like they expected me to break. But I didn't. I couldn't. My grief felt too sharp to cry. When the service ended, people shuffled past to give condolences. "He loved you so much," Mrs. Callahan from next door whispered, gripping my hands. "He was a good man," another said. I nodded, smiled mechanically, heard none of it. My mind was stuck on a single question I couldn't shake. Why had Daniel been in the office that day at all? He'd told me he had a doctor's appointment. The will reading was scheduled for the next morning at Barnes & Rowe, the law firm Daniel had used for years. I'd imagined it a quiet, straightforward affair. But when I arrived, the air felt tense, like the room itself knew something I didn't. The lawyer, Mr. Whitaker, was an older man with wire-rimmed glasses and a voice like gravel. He shuffled papers, clearing his throat before beginning. My stepson, Daniel's son from his first marriage, sat across from me. His expression was unreadable. Most of the will was standard: donations to charity, small bequests to friends. Then came my section, and to my beloved wife, Claire, I leave the sum of $10 million, under the express condition that she not remarry. Should she enter into a legal marriage with another man, the funds shall be forfeit and distributed instead to my son. The words rang in my ears, each syllable heavier than the last. I actually laughed, a sharp, nervous sound that felt out of place in the silent room. "You're joking," I said. Whitaker shook his head. "I'm afraid not. It's all here in writing, signed and notarized 3 months ago. 3 months ago." That detail lodged itself in my brain like a splinter. 3 months ago, Daniel had been different, distant sometimes, then overly attentive in strange ways. I had chalked it up to stress at work. "I don't understand," I said finally. "Why would he put that in there?" No one answered. After the meeting, Daniel's son lingered just long enough to give me a look I couldn't quite place. Pity? Amusement? Whatever it was, it made my skin crawl. That night, I sat at the dining table with the will in front of me, reading the clause over and over. The wording was meticulous, ironclad. This wasn't some old-fashioned boilerplate clause from a decades-old document. It was deliberate. I poured myself a glass of wine and tried to picture Daniel sitting with Whitaker, instructing him to put this in. Was he imagining me in black forever? Was this about love, jealousy, or something else? By midnight, my wine was gone, and so was any certainty I had about the man I'd married. The next day, Whitaker called to clarify a few details. I almost didn't go, but curiosity or maybe stubbornness won out. He explained that Daniel had made the change privately, without telling anyone, and had delivered the updated will personally. He hadn't even let his son know. I've handled estate planning for 30 years, Mrs. Hale, Whitaker said carefully. This clause, it's unusual, not unheard of, but rare, especially for a man like Daniel. A man like Daniel? I asked. He hesitated. Practical, private, not prone to dramatic gestures, which made the clause feel even more like a message. Before I left, Whitaker handed me a sealed envelope. Daniel left this for you as well. Said it was to be given after the will reading. I waited until I was home to open it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence, written in Daniel's familiar handwriting. Trust me, Claire, it's better this way. Better what way? Better for me to be alone forever? Better for me to take the money and never move on? Or better that I never look too closely at something he didn't want me to see? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying our last few months together in my mind. The late nights at the office, the sudden insistence on updating our estate plans, the way he flinched when I mentioned a coworker's second marriage. I realized something chilling. This clause wasn't about love or loyalty. It was about control, and control only mattered if there was something to hide. The next morning, I made two decisions. First, I wasn't telling anyone about the note. Second, I was going to find out exactly what Daniel didn't want me to know, no matter what it cost. The day after I decided to investigate, I drove to Daniel's office. I told myself it was to collect his things, framed photos, personal files, the little espresso cup he used every morning. But really, I wanted to see the place where he had spent so much of his life, right up until the moment he died. His assistant, Marcy, greeted me with a look that was equal parts sympathy and discomfort. She led me into Daniel's corner office, where everything was just as he'd left it, a jacket draped over the back of his chair, a half-empty coffee cup on the desk, his computer still on sleep mode. I'm so sorry again, Mrs. Hale, she said softly. We all loved him here. I smiled faintly. Thank you, Marcy. I just need a few minutes. When she left, I started opening drawers. Most held the usual pens, business cards, a bottle of ibuprofen, but the bottom right drawer was locked. I rummaged through his desk until I found the key taped under the top drawer. Inside were 3 folders marked private. The first contained bank statements from an account I'd never seen before offshore in the Cayman Islands. The balances were in the millions. The second was a file of property deeds, all in Daniel's name, for houses and apartments I had no idea existed. The third folder stopped me cold. It contained a prenuptial agreement. Not ours. This one was between Daniel and a woman named Elizabeth Carr. The date was 7 years before we met. That night, I sat in my living room staring at those papers. Daniel had told me he'd never been married before. So who was Elizabeth? The next morning, I called Whitaker and asked if he knew anything about a previous marriage. He sounded genuinely surprised. No, Claire, Daniel never mentioned another wife. I didn't believe him. Later that week, Daniel's son, Michael, came by unannounced. He leaned against the doorway like he owned the place. Still deciding whether to take the money, he asked casually, "What's it to you?" I shot back. He smirked. "Just curious, because if you don't, it all comes to me. And if you do, well, I figure I can wait. People don't live alone forever." It was then I realized something he already knew about the clause, which meant Daniel had told him, or he'd read the will long before I did. Either way, he seemed far too comfortable with the idea of me losing the money. That evening, I found myself at the kitchen table again, going through Daniel's personal laptop. It took me hours to crack his password or anniversary date. Of all things, but once I did, I found a folder buried deep in the documents labeled archive. Inside were scanned letters, receipts, and emails. One email chain stood out. A series of messages between Daniel and someone named EC discussing a settlement and keeping everything quiet. The last message was dated 2 weeks before his death. The next day, I returned to Whitaker's office, unannounced this time. I placed the email printouts on his desk. "Who is Elizabeth Carr?" I asked. Whitaker sighed heavily, removing his glasses. "Claire, I wasn't lying when I said I didn't know about a marriage. But I do know Elizabeth Carr. She sued Daniel 15 years ago. For what? Fraud. Financial and personal. The pieces didn't fit, not yet. But I could feel the shape of the puzzle forming. Daniel had lied about his past. He had money hidden offshore. And now, from beyond the grave, he was trying to keep me from what? Meeting someone who might tell me the truth? Having the legal standing as a spouse to access certain records? It was Michael who accidentally gave me the next clue. We ran into each other at a cafe a few days later. He made small talk about the estate, then casually mentioned, "Funny thing about Dad, he always said remarriage ruins everything. Said that's why he never did it again." Again? I asked, my voice steady but my pulse racing. Michael froze for a split second before covering with a shrug. "I mean with you, never got married again after Mom. Only he hadn't been married to his mother when she had him. She'd told me that herself over wine one Thanksgiving, which meant Michael had just admitted Daniel had been married more than once. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the $10 million clause was more than control, it was protection. Not for me, but for him, even in death. Because if I remarried, I'd be less bound to his memory, less bound to his secrets, and maybe, just maybe, more likely to uncover the one thing he'd spent a lifetime hiding." The first time I said Elizabeth Carr's name out loud, it felt like opening a door I couldn't close again. It was 2 days after my conversation with Michael, and I was sitting in the archives room of the county courthouse, sifting through old marriage records. The place smelled of dust and ink, the air heavy with decades of secrets. I told the clerk I was doing genealogy research, and she didn't ask any more questions. I found her in a yellowed ledger from 20 years ago. Daniel Hale married Elizabeth Carr, February 12th. The marriage lasted only 11 months before being annulled. No reason given, but in the margin, someone had scribbled in pencil, "See case file 02349A. The file wasn't in the public stacks. When I asked, the clerk's expression shifted, wary, almost sympathetic. "That one's restricted. You'd need a court order." That night, I searched Elizabeth Carr online. No social media, no LinkedIn, no photos, not even in old yearbooks. But I found one thing, a news article from 15 years ago. Local woman wins settlement in fraud case against businessman. The businessman was Daniel. The article was vague, citing misrepresentation in financial dealings and personal damages. No details. But a name at the bottom caught my eye, the attorney who'd represented her, Richard Vaughn. The next morning, I called his office. The receptionist told me he'd retired, but after some gentle persistence and a hint of desperation in my voice, she gave me his personal number. Vaughn's voice was gravelly with age. When I introduced myself, there was a long pause. "Claire," he said finally, "I was wondering when you'd call. You know who I am. I knew you'd exist eventually." Daniel wasn't the kind of man to die alone. We met that afternoon in a quiet diner on the edge of town. Vaughn was in his 70s, sharp-eyed despite the tremor in his hands. "I can't give you details," he said as soon as we sat down. "Confidentiality and all that. But I can tell you this, Elizabeth Carr wasn't just a scorned ex-wife. She was a whistleblower." "Whistleblower for what?" He leaned in. "Your husband was moving money, not just his. Investors, partners, sometimes even clients through offshore accounts. And Elizabeth caught him. She had proof. The settlement was hush money." I felt cold all over. "So, the $10 million in the will isn't generosity," Vaughn finished for me. "It's leverage. If you remarry, you're free. Free to talk to someone who might make you open those old files. But as long as you keep the money, you have motive to stay quiet. And legally, it keeps certain parties from revisiting the case." Back home, I stared at the folders from Daniel's office. I had already suspected the offshore accounts were shady, but this confirmed it. Still, something didn't add up. If the clause was about keeping me quiet, why not just leave me nothing? Why tie it to marriage? The answer came from an unlikely place, Daniel's accountant, a mild, balding man named Harris. I called him under the pretense of needing help with estate paperwork. Halfway through our meeting, I asked casually, if I remarried, would that change my access to Daniel's financial records? Harris didn't even blink. "Yes, spousal privilege only extends to the current marriage. Remarry, and you lose that protection. You could be subpoenaed to testify about his finances," and there it was, the real reason. It was Michael who gave me the next breadcrumb without realizing it. We ran into each other at a high-end grocery store. He was in a suit, far nicer than anything he'd worn at the funeral. Big day? I asked lightly. Meeting with Dad's old partners, he said, smirking. They've been generous. The word felt loaded. When he left, I followed him. He drove to an upscale law office I didn't recognize. A quick internet search told me it belonged to Benton and Crow, a firm notorious for representing corporations accused of financial misconduct. That night, I went through Daniel's email archive again, focusing on the weeks before his death. Buried in his sent folder was a draft never sent addressed to me. Claire, if you ever find this, I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you, but it would have put you in danger. If you hear the name Carr again, walk away. They won't stop at money. Danger. Not just legal trouble. Something worse. The next step was finding Elizabeth. It took me a week, a handful of cash to a private investigator, and a lot of unanswered calls. But eventually, I got a location, a small coastal town 2 states away. When I arrived, Elizabeth answered her own door. She was in her mid-40s, with a kind of wary elegance that came from surviving too much. I wondered if you'd come, she said, stepping aside to let me in. Over tea, she told me everything. Daniel hadn't worked alone. He was part of a network of investors, politicians, lawyers who laundered money through shell companies and offshore accounts. Elizabeth had stumbled onto it when she found transaction records in his study. When she threatened to go to the authorities, they didn't just offer her money, they threatened her life. Daniel saved me in his own way, she admitted. He paid me off, made sure I disappeared. But the others, they wanted me gone for good. Why the marriage clause? I asked. Because if you marry someone outside their circle, you're a risk. That spouse could pull you into a situation where you'd have to testify. They needed you bound to Daniel even in death. As I left her house, the weight of the decision hit me. $10 million was more money than I'd ever imagined having. But it came with a leash. If I kept it, I was safe maybe. But I'd never be truly free. If I gave it up, I'd be in danger. But I'd have the truth. I didn't go home after leaving Elizabeth's. I drove until the coastal road turned inland and the horizon emptied, until the cell service fractured into dots and the only light left was the moon. When I finally pulled into a motel, the kind with humming soda machines and a clerk who didn't look up, I locked the door, set a chair under the knob, and spread everything I had across the floral bedspread. The accounts, the draft email, the will, the note. Trust me, Claire, it's better this way. Better for whom? I opened my laptop and mapped what I knew. Shell companies tied to Daniel's firm. Dates of wire transfers that mirrored political fundraisers. Small property LLCs that held big buildings in bad neighborhoods. A Cayman account that moved in rhythmic pulses, money in, money out like a heartbeat trying to hide arrhythmia. At 2:17 a.m., a notification popped up in the corner of my screen. Unrecognized login attempt denied. Someone had my email address. Someone was trying to see what I saw. I unplugged the laptop, powered it down, and slept dressed, shoes on, the chair still wedged against the door. Morning came with a headache and a decision. If this was a network, then there was a center. And if there was a center, Michael knew where it was. I called him from the motel parking lot. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick with last night. Busy? I asked lightly. Always. What's up? I want to talk, I said. Face to face. No lawyers. It's about your father. A pause. Where? His office. 1 hour. He laughed. Bold. See you then. I'd been in Daniel's office a dozen times since he died, but I'd never noticed how the skyline reflected in the glass framed his desk like a picture he'd hung of himself. Michael arrived 6 minutes late, carrying confidence like a second skin. He didn't sit. He prowled. You look tired, he said. You look rich, I replied. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Perks of good mentorship. Is that what you call it? I laid a printout on the desk, a ledger of transfers into one of the offshore accounts, dates lined up against political action committee filings. Daniel wasn't just moving money. He was laundering influence. He glanced at the paper without interest. Is there a point, Claire? The clause. I tapped the desk. I thought it was about love or control. It was about spousal privilege. If I remarried, I could be compelled to testify. He needed me bound. Even after he was gone, Michael's gaze sharpened. You've been talking to people you shouldn't, so have you? I took out a second sheet. A photo I'd snapped with my phone of him walking into Benton and Crow. They're not mentors, they're handlers. He didn't flinch. He leaned in, bracing his hands on the desk, and for the first time I saw Daniel in him, not the face, but the force. You think you're the first woman to discover your husband had secrets? He asked softly. You're not. The ones who survive are the ones who know when to stop. I waited. Silence was the best pry bar. He straightened, slipped his hands into his pockets, and changed tactics. Take the money, Claire. Live well. That's what he wanted. He wanted me quiet. That too. Why? I asked. If he loved me, why make me a prisoner? Michael's smile faded. Because you're not a prisoner. You're collateral, and collateral keeps the building from collapsing. He left before I could reply. Collateral. I closed my eyes. Daniel had moved money, yes, but not only for greed. For stability. For a structure built on bad foundations and held together by fear. If I pulled too hard, other things would fall, people, careers, maybe governments I never saw. I wasn't sure if that made it worse or better. Harris, the accountant, was the kind of man who covered fear with neatness. His office smelled like dust and lemon cleaner. I requested clarifications, and he gave me coded truths, phrases like legacy vehicles and pass-through entities, until I placed a draft email on his desk, the one Daniel never sent. Danger, I said. He wrote danger. Whose? Harris removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. You didn't hear this from me, he said, which is what cowards say before they do the right thing. There are 3 names that matter. Benton, the fixer, Crow, the architect, and Whitaker. I blinked. Whitaker? My lawyer? Daniel's lawyer, he corrected softly. For 30 years. I left without thanking him. If I said the word out loud, it might calcify into something like betrayal, and I had no room left in me for one more shape of hurt. Whitaker's office was quieter than usual, as if sound itself had been told to be respectful. He stood when I entered, a performance of courtesy that looked like an apology from far away. I want my file, I said. He nodded to his assistant, who brought a banker's box, thin, too thin for a life. I didn't touch it. When did you start working for Benton and Crow? I asked. He sighed. I don't. Then why did Harris say your name? I took out the memo Elizabeth had let me photocopy, keep her bound written in the margins, not in Daniel's hand. You drafted this. His jaw worked. The truth was a reluctant animal. I advised on language, he said. At Daniel's request, and at Benton's suggestion. He didn't deny it. Why? I asked. You could have refused. He sat, and just like that he looked old. In our world, refusal is a kind of consent. To be replaced, to be ruined, to be erased. I have a family. So did I. We regarded each other across the desk like survivors at opposite ends of the same boat. Then he slid something toward me. A key card in a plastic sleeve, stamped with the logo of a private storage facility. Last time he came to see me, Whitaker said, he left that. Said if anything ever happened, you'd know what to do. Did you read what's in there? No, the lie was polite. I pocketed the card anyway. At the door he said, be careful, Claire. I'm tired of being careful. Then be lucky. The storage facility was the kind with clean hallways and cameras that blinked like patient eyes. Unit 207. I slid the card, twisted the lock, and pulled up the metal door. Inside, a steel table, a single chair, and 2 boxes. The room smelled faintly of cold paper and old glue. I opened the first box and found ledgers handwritten, double columns, dates and initials. Not just Daniel's. EC. And MBH. And B initials that could be anyone and felt like everyone. In the second, 4 old cell phones, a spiral notebook with a cracked cover, and a small black pouch. The phones were dead. The notebook was not. A diary of sorts. Daniel's handwriting, cramped when he was frightened, loose when he was relieved. I flipped to a page marked with a torn receipt. If she loves again, they'll use it to pull her into court. If she testifies, the others will bury her. The money buys time. Time buys safety. God forgive me. I sat. The chair was cold. The black pouch was heavier than it looked. Inside, a flash drive and a wedding band I didn't recognize. Plain gold. Wide, engraved on the inside E+D, 2/12. Elizabeth. He kept the ring. He kept the memory. He kept 1,000 things I didn't know. I pocketed the band and the drive. The rest I reboxed, slid back into the shadows, lowered the door, and walked into sunlight that didn't feel like mine. At home, I didn't plug the flash drive into my laptop. I took the old desktop in the guest room, disconnected Wi-Fi, covered the webcam with tape, and booted a machine that hadn't held secrets since the year I met Daniel. The drive held 3 folders: structure, names, insurance. In structure, a diagram, circles within circles, shell companies, cutouts, holding firms that held other holding firms. In names, a list, donors and judges, and a pastor I recognized from TV. In insurance, 3 PDFs, scan sign affidavits, notarized, from men I'd never heard of who wrote about things the public didn't know. I printed nothing. I memorized what I could. When I finished, I turned off the computer and sat on the floor until my legs went numb and the sun slid from one side of the room to the other. They hadn't just laundered money, they'd laundered outcomes, cases, elections, zoning permits, and school board seats, and anything that could be bought with influence instead of cash. The clause wasn't jealousy, it was scaffolding. If I stayed single, I remained Daniel's widow, protected by the perimeter of his legacy. If I married, I became a stranger free to testify. They could drag me in, peel back privilege, and force me to become the hammer that cracked what they'd built. They weren't protecting me. They were protecting themselves from me. I laughed, a broken sound. Grief is a tunnel, but anger is a door. Someone followed me for the first time 2 days later. Not a car I recognized. A black sedan, the kind you rent when you prefer to be unremarkable. It sat 2 lengths back, made the same turns, idled when I idled. When I changed routes on purpose, it adjusted like a shadow reattaching. I drove to a grocery store, parked, went in, and walked straight through to the exit by the loading dock. Outside, I waited. The man who emerged was not the sedan's driver. He was the shape that hires drivers. Mid-50s, expensive casual. The kind of face that looks like 10 other faces in a boardroom. "Can I help you?" I asked. He smiled without teeth. "I represent interested parties, Benton or Crow." "Names aren't helpful," he said. "Decisions are." "Here's mine," I said. "I'm not selling." He tilted his head. "It's not a transaction. It always is." He stepped closer, lowered his voice. "Marry whoever you want. We don't care about the ceremony. We care about the forum. You become a witness if you do. Witnesses can be compelled. Witnesses can be discredited. Witnesses can be unlucky." I held his gaze. "Then I'll be careful," he chuckled. "Don't mistake a closed door for safety, Mrs. Hale. Sometimes it's just a room without exits." He left. I shook so hard I could barely unlock the car. I needed someone not in their orbit. Someone who owed Benton and Crow nothing, who still remembered what a scandal was for. I called the national reporter who'd tried to track me after Elizabeth's settlement story resurfaced in a niche forum, the one who'd left 2 voicemails I never returned. We met at a coffee shop with big windows and poor acoustics. She brought a small recorder and a face that had seen too many almosts. "Off the record," I said, "until you say otherwise." I gave her a sketch, a clause, a dead husband, a network with a spine strong enough to bend laws. I didn't give names. I did slide her a photo of the flash drive directory. 3 folder titles she could spend a career chasing. "If I publish," she asked, "what happens to you?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe nothing. And if I don't, then nothing happens to anyone." She studied me. "Why not take the 10 million and disappear?" "Because disappearing is what they count on." She nodded. Recorder still dark. "You'll call me when you're ready." "I don't know if I ever will." "Most people don't," she said gently. "But they want to." That night, the house felt foreign. I poured a drink and didn't touch it. I laid the ring on the table, Elizabeth's, and stared at it until it blurred. I thought about Daniel's diary line. "The money buys time. Time buys safety." Maybe he was right. Maybe the bravest thing I could do was nothing. Live quietly. Let the structure stand and pretend the scaffolding wasn't built from bones. Or maybe the bravest thing was the opposite. The doorbell rang. No one visits at 10:43 p.m. unless they're selling God or bringing bad news. I opened it to find Whitaker on the porch, coat collar up, rain in his hair. "I shouldn't be here," he said. "Then don't be." He stepped in anyway and handed me an envelope. Inside, a printout of a meeting calendar. Benton, Crow, Michael, tomorrow, Whitaker said, voice low. Conference room 12. They'll decide whether to escalate. If they do, you lose the money. You may lose the protection. So the leash snaps, but the wolves stay. He met my eyes. Decide tonight, Claire, what you are. Widow, witness, or something else. He left without looking back. I didn't sleep. I drafted 2 letters instead. The first, to Whitaker, instructing him to begin formal steps to disclaim the bequest, to refuse the 10 million, to walk away. The second, to Michael. 1 sentence. If you sit in that room tomorrow, you sit across from me forever. At 5:12 a.m., I printed both and sealed them. At 5:13, I tore them in half. Choices aren't made on paper. They're made in the body. I showered. I dressed. I put Elizabeth's ring on a chain and wore it under my blouse where it could warm to my skin. I drove to the office towers as the city opened its eyes, trash trucks clattering, joggers in neon, coffee in hands that couldn't hold sleep. In the lobby, I bypassed security by following a cluster of suits. On 12, I pressed my ear to a conference room door and listened to a language I recognized without understanding. The calculus of risk. If she remarries, we compel. If she doesn't, we contain. The drive. She's smarter than we thought. The son. Silence. Then Michael's voice. Clean and cold. Let me talk to her. The door opened. I didn't step back. We faced each other in the hall like 2 people who had loved the same ghost. You're early, he said. You're late, I answered. He took my elbow, not rough, not kind, and guided me toward a smaller room with a glass wall and a view over the city. Inside, he closed the door. You're not safe, he said. I'm not scared. I lied. You should be. Benton wants to trigger a clause in the trust behavioral misconduct. They'll claim you violated terms. You lose the principal and the protections. So I lose the leash and keep the wolves. Something like that. Don't do this, I said. Step out. Leave them the room. I'm not you. He replied. I don't get to be knave. Knave. I laughed. I'm the only one in this building telling the truth. He stared at me long enough for my certainty to wobble. Then he said, my father loved you. Whatever else he was, he loved you. Don't make his last act meaningless. His last act was fear. His last act was a shield. Michael snapped. You think he didn't know what they'd do to you if you made yourself useful to their enemies? Keep the money and live, Claire. And be what? An echo? I stepped closer. What do you want, really? He didn't answer. We stood there until the air thinned. He finally reached into his pocket and set a key on the table. A storage unit tag. Different facility. Different part of town. What's this? I asked. The other half, he said. If you're going to burn it down, at least see the whole map. Why are you helping me? Because I want to win, he said simply, and because I don't think you can. He left. I pocketed the key. The second unit was smaller, a single banker's box. Inside, 36 cashier's checks, never cashed, each for $50,000, spaced across 12 years, made out to names I didn't recognize. Taped to the lid, a business card, Benton and Crow with a handwritten message on the back. Insurance premiums. Keep current. Hush money. On a schedule. For whom? Plaintiffs? Whistleblowers? People like Elizabeth who didn't disappear easily? I photographed everything and left the box untouched. On the way out, I noticed the camera above the door tilt. They were watching. Of course they were. I drove to the river and sat with the engine off until the cold forced me to choose between shivering and deciding. Water moved with or without witness. So would the machine if I walked away. In the afternoon, I called the reporter. On the record, I said. She was quiet for a beat. Are you sure? No, I said, but do it anyway. We met in a parking lot. I didn't give her the drive. I gave her the ring. Why this? She asked. Because it's proof, I said, that the story isn't about money. It's about vows that were bargains. About the way love can be turned into a contract you didn't sign. That night, I drafted a statement to accompany whatever she wrote, careful, spare, true enough to stand and vague enough not to topple me outright. I didn't send it. The next morning, Whitaker called. They've frozen the disbursement, he said, until your behavior conforms. I laughed. Then I suppose I'm unbecoming. What do you want me to do? Nothing, I said. For once, let's see what happens when I don't move first. After I hung up, I made coffee and drank it by the window. The city looked ordinary: buses, dog walkers, a child with a backpack too big. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. You're making a mistake. Last chance. I typed and erased 6 replies. I settled on none. At noon, a courier arrived with a small package. No return address. Familiar handwriting. Inside, a single sheet of paper torn from Daniel's notebook. If you're reading this, I couldn't keep you safe the way I wanted. Forgive me for the clause. Forgive me for the map. Choose the life that lets you breathe, even if it's not with me. I folded the page along creases someone else had made and set it beside the ring. The reporter's story would run in a week, or a month, or never. Benton would escalate or retreat. Michael would choose a side or discover there weren't any. As for me, I dressed, pocketed nothing, and walked out into a day that didn't care who I married or what I refused. On the table, the will sat beside a pan. I could sign the acceptance and live inside the quiet Daniel bought with $10 million. I could sign the disclaimer and light a fuse I couldn't put out. I left both unsigned. For now. Because there are choices that are answers, and there are choices that are leverage. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is keep the world waiting while you learn how to breathe underwater. I closed the door behind me and didn't look back. The pen was still on the table when I came home. Same place, same angle, like it had been waiting for me to decide. I didn't pick it up. Instead, I poured a drink and sat in the chair by the window, the one with the view of the city's arteries, traffic sliding through like blood in a restless body. I thought about Daniel's claws, the leash, the wolves, and the key Michael had given me, burning in my pocket like a decision I hadn't made yet. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. They voted. Escalation. Move fast. No name. No context. But I didn't need either. Escalation meant action, not mine, theirs. That night I didn't sleep. At 3:04 a.m., I pulled the banker's box from the second unit back into my mind. Cashier's checks, hush money, a schedule that was a heartbeat in paper. Those payments were a thread, and I'd already tugged hard enough that I could feel the whole fabric shifting. By morning, I knew I couldn't just choose between 10 million and freedom. That was Daniel's binary. My choice had to be wider, messier. I called the reporter. I'm ready, I said. She didn't hesitate. We'll need names. You'll get them, I said. But not all at once. Why not? Because if I hand you everything, they'll crush me before you print a word. I'll give you enough to make them move. Then I'll see where they run. Bait, she said. Exactly. I started with the small truths. The will clause. The offshore accounts. The prenuptial with Elizabeth Carr. I gave her copies of the emails with EC about the settlement. Not the diagram. Not the names list. Not yet. She listened, scribbling notes in a hand that had seen too many stories die before sunrise. When this runs, you'll be a target. I already am. Michael called 2 days later. His voice was low, urgent. What did you do? Leverage, I said. You're playing with a matchbook in a room full of gasoline. That's the point. You think you can win. I think I can survive. There's a difference. He was silent for a beat. They won't let you walk away with both, the money and the freedom. Then maybe I won't walk away at all. 3 days later, the first article dropped. Not in the national paper, too loud, too soon. A regional investigative outlet with enough reach to make the right people nervous. The headline didn't name Benton or Crow, but it painted them in shadows big enough for anyone paying attention to recognize the outline. That night, I saw the sedan again. Same driver, no effort to hide. This time, I let them follow me to the grocery store. I stood in the parking lot, staring at them until they drove away. Message received. They were watching. Message sent. So was I. Whitaker came by the next morning. He looked older than I'd ever seen him. They want you to stop, he said. I'm sure they do. They've offered terms. What kind? You keep the money. You sign a non-disclosure. You agree never to remarry. In writing. Legally binding. No exceptions. So the same leash. Just thicker. Yes, but no wolves. I laughed. A short, humorless sound. There are always wolves, Whitaker. You just feed them differently. That night, I laid everything out on the table. The will, the 2 keys, the ring, the flash drive, the note from Daniel. And I asked myself out loud, What do you want to be? Widow? Witness? Or something else? I thought about what Michael had said, that Daniel's last act was a shield. Maybe it was, but shields can be used to protect the wrong people. I thought about the hush payments, the names on the drive, the way the network could bend the law without breaking it. And then I thought about Daniel himself, the man who had loved me, lied to me, and tried to save me in the same breath. At dawn, I made my choice. I took the pen, signed the will acceptance, and slipped it into an envelope. Then I walked to the guest room, plugged in the old desktop, and opened the folder marked names. I started typing them into an encrypted file. Not for the reporter. Not yet. For me. A ledger of leverage. If Benton and Crow wanted me bound, I'd be bound, but I'd hold the chain. The reporter called later that day. "Do we keep going?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "but slow. We let them think they've contained me. Then we see how much they leak when they relax. You're turning into one of them," she said, half accusing, half admiring. "Maybe," I said, "or maybe I'm just learning how to breathe in their air." That night, Michael texted me, "You're still in the game." Good. I didn't reply, because the truth was, I didn't know yet if I was playing to win or just playing not to lose. And maybe that was the point. The money, the freedom, the third path, all of them still on the table, all of them dangerous. For now, I'd let them wonder which I'd choose. Because sometimes the most powerful move is the one they can't predict. And sometimes not choosing is the choice that changes everything.